So we had an interesting issue at work, and that was the fact that when we had multiple versions of Nuke running at the same time, the viewer cache would somehow get corrupt. And so to find out what was going on, I decided to sort of see how that viewer caching system actually works and see if I could figure out what would cause the issue. And as you know, inside of Nuke's temporary folder, there is a bunch of different cache files, or cache folders that is. There's audio cache and a JIT cache. The JIT cache is where all of your compiled Blink scripts is. I use that a lot. And we have things like timeline cache, where your Nuke Studio and Hero timelines are cached. And then we have this viewer cache folder. And inside the viewer cache folder, there's a bunch of strange folders with small names. And inside those, there are a bunch of files with also some strange names. For those with a keen eye, these things are like a hash, so they are 14 digits. Usually a hash inside of Nuke is 16 digits. So I think most likely what's going on is that it takes the 16 digits hash, take the first two digits and use as a folder name, and then use the rest as a file name. Anyway, these NKC files, you cannot read them into Nuke, and there's no public documentation about them, so they're just like a black box. And so I decided to reverse engineer the file format. It's relatively simple. There are some things with your height goes over 640, it will start to interleave some of the different fields, but it's manageable. So I've made this this viewer thing. It allows me to view, as you can see, this is the NKC file it's viewing right now, and have a list of all the files that's being cached right now. This is the whole timeline. So if I clear my cache, all the files are gone, and when I hit play, you can see the caches are being loaded in there. And so now I can watch them in full screen if I like to, and sort of toggle between them. I can even hit play if I like to, so I can see the whole sequence. And so that's quite interesting. Another thing is that if I disable full screen processing, let me go into another sequence here. Let me disable that thing, and if I go in here and change the color here to yellow, you can see like part of the viewer here is yellow and some of it is blue. Let's see if we can find a different, more obvious color, like here. And then as I move out here, you can see it slowly starts updating that particular cache file. So it doesn't create like a new cache file, it just updates the existing one with the additional data. So that's also good to know, I guess. But as you notice, every time I make any kind of change to the viewer, it will add a new cache file. So if you do a lot of changes, it will add up to the cache file size quite quickly. But that's also quite convenient, because if you have a thing like this and you go from like 0.9, 0.8, 0.7, and they'll go back to 0.8 again, that thing have already been cached, so it doesn't need to recalculate the whole image. So it's a quite good thing that it actually caches quite often. And of course, you set your cache size to appropriate level, so that it doesn't take up your entire disk space. There is, however, a few problems, and just to show you, if I add a roto node and start painting, you can see it adds a new cache for every single stroke I make here, even though there are really no changes to the frame. But I mean, it's okay, I guess. And then when I finalize it, I get the shape, and when I change the shape, it updates. One thing that doesn't update is if I start to do roto paint. And so the problem is that when you're on a frame here and you make any kind of changes, notice I've set full frame processing on, so we are absolutely sure this thing should be cached. And then you move to the next frame, and when you move back again, that thing have to re-render, even though we are absolutely sure that thing was already cached. And so if you're doing a lot of cleanup work and a lot of paint work, you're having to constantly re-render frames that you've already kind of rendered. So I think that's good to know for people. Like if you just make some paint changes and you just move the opacity slider or something like that, that will actually cause the thing to update. So for now, I think it's a bug, so it might be fixed in the future. Another thing that is quite curious is that if I add a transform node here, let me just put this median node out. And as you notice, as I start to move this thing around, you can see you know, the thing is getting cached. But sometimes it doesn't. That's quite curious. So as it turns out, let's say I have this region, right? Now that this is cached. And you can think internally, it when I start to moving it around, it says, have you been cached? No, I've not been cached. But when I return to an area that had been cached, it says, oh, now you've been cached. But if I then move it again, it forgets to set that thing back again. So now it thinks that the frame has been cached. And when I let go, oh, sorry, like so, and so. And now it doesn't update. So it seems like there's like some value that's getting set that is not being unset. So I think that's a bug as well. But yeah, it's quite convenient to have things like this, because if you hit play in a sequence, I mean, that's the usual thing. You sit and you really want to see the stuff you've been working on, but if you hit go to start, right, it doesn't cache anymore. So now I can actually have this thing cache in the background, and I can hit play. And this allows me to view all of the frames, even, you know, 29s now. It automatically adds the new frames. And see these things while it's caching in the background, without, of course, me having to put the thing on the farm and so on. And if Nuke were to crash, I can always go in and see what happened the moment just before it crashed. So if I've made some changes during the last 15 seconds before the last autosave, I can see the moment just before it crashed and try to recreate that particular thing that I've made. Usually some awesome stuff. I'm really fast. So yeah, NKC viewer.